If you consider yourself a cultured person, then you've seen famous artworks like the Mona Lisa and Van Gogh's Starry Night. But what if I told you we can take these famous paintings and extrapolate them, extend them backwards to infinity? Well, wouldn't that be a cool thing to do? And it is a cool thing to do. Let me show you how to do it. For this tutorial, we're going to be using Midjourney, which if you haven't heard of it, you should have probably heard of it by now. But if you haven't heard of it, it's an AI image generator that uses Discord as a client, and this is what we're going to be using to do the thing. Now, in the Discord client, you can already see that I've started working on this, zooming out of the Mona Lisa, but let me show you how to do this. Instead of just importing in an image of the Mona Lisa, it turns out that Midjourney actually knows what the Mona Lisa looks like, because there's a lot of images of it. So all we're going to do is we are going to do /imagine, which is how you get Midjourney to actually write something, and we are going to type the Mona Lisa. So Midjourney has generated us some AI images, and what we need to do is pick our favorite of these. We're not going to pick the top left because this is not accurate to the Mona Lisa. We're going to pick one of these other three. Specifically, I kind of like the second one, which is to say quadrant number 2. Click U2. And what happens is you can see that it actually isolates this image, and we get a bunch of controls here, namely the zoom out 2x feature, which is new to, I think, Midjourney version 5. Now, if you do not see these settings, make sure to use the /settings command, and this is what's going to let you pick your version of Midjourney. I'm using version 5.2, I guess. So as I hinted at, take your image, click zoom out to X, and now it's going to start processing a zoomed out image where the center of it is preserving the original image. Now, as you might expect, what we're going to do is we are again going to pick our favorite. And I guess all of these have vignettes, but it's going to make it work. I kind of like this bottom right fourth quadrant. So again, I'm going to click U4, which is going to upscale version 4 and give us the full image. And we are just going to click zoom out 2x. Cool thing about this one is now we've extended far back enough that we're actually seeing our scene. There's the floor, and you know, we can tell that's in a room. At this point, I think you get the drill. We're just going to keep picking our favorite image and repeating this process. So I'm going to do this for a couple iterations.
Hello out there.
And honestly, this is something I could keep doing, but it takes a very fucking long time. So I'm gonna call it quits here. So starting with our first image, we're gonna need to download this. So I'm just gonna open it, and I'm gonna click open in browser, which I think lets you download it at a higher resolution. If I'm wrong, then I'm wrong, and that's just what it is. Open in browser, right click, save image as Mona Lisa 2. And you're just gonna keep repeating this process. Okay, so we have downloaded 10 images, which is definitely enough for this. But one thing I noticed actually going through these is as we keep zooming out, this gets more and more cursed. Like, I don't know what text this is, and if you kind of go backwards, you can see that some of these paintings really are cursed. Now, I don't know if there's a way to avoid this, kind of like the distortion as you pull out, but hopefully we're zooming out fast enough that you can't even tell. I'm going to run the command import images as planes, which is an add-on that lets you kind of bring in an image as a plane. Duh. And I'm gonna click Mona Lisa 1 and make sure that in our material type we click emission, which I think is just gonna let us have the image without any principled BSDF stuff. And here's our first image, and what we need to do is kind of zoom out with every consecutive image. Bring in Mona Lisa number 2, which you can see kind of zooms out a bit, but it's gonna obstruct our first image. Go on the Z-axis and bring it down a little. Doesn't really matter by how much. And when we scale this up, you're gonna see by scaling it by the perfect amount, which is actually just gonna be 2, but some of you might be saying these don't line up exactly. And they don't. This is kind of the issue with the zoom out by 2. But I have a solution to kind of blend these in together a bit better. So in Mona Lisa 1, I want you to go to the material. What we're going to do is we are going to make a circular mask. Texture set to, it's always spherical or quadratic sphere, I can't remember. You gotta make sure that this is using object coordinates, and this is what's going to make it centered. Now to make this look more like a circle, it turns out I should not have deleted that mapping node. We're essentially gonna zoom this out itself. So you can bring up the scale, and now you can see we have the circle. Take the factor or the color, and connect it to the alpha. It's kind of working, but these images do not exactly line up, and that's kind of the point of the issue. We are just going to make the mask a bit stronger, so I'm just going to send this through a multiply. And you can see the stronger the multiplication, the better this is going to work. So this is what it looks like with the mask, and this is without the mask. What I recommend doing is taking all of this, Control G to make it a node group, and we are going to basically repeat this each time. So just so you understand the procedure, our next step, which we are going to do again, then yes, you can import in multiple images at the same time, I know, but I'm gonna do it one by one. Bring your new image downwards, and from the top view, you wanna scale it by 2, but then scale it by 2 again. In other words, you scale it by 4. And in this case, the colors don't really line up. I can go to my group, I can go to node group, which is that thing I made before, and I'm gonna connect this to the alpha. And you know, it isn't perfect, but you can see it blends in a lot better than it used to. Hopefully when we zoom out quickly enough, you can't tell. So you can see the colors match better in this case, but really the lining up does not, so I don't know. It seems to be doing something weird under the hood. And I think what I discovered here is we can actually offset this on the y-axis, and now it actually lines up a lot better. And also I'm seeing that our original image, the one on top, is starting to get hella distorted, and that's because the transparencies are stacking in some sense. All I'm going to do is I'm going to go into this node group, which is going to be applied to all of them, add a color ramp node, and it's going to be as simple as bringing up the black slider.
Conductor, we have a problem! Conductor, we have a problem! Conductor, we have a problem! Conductor, we have a problem!
Now I decided to stop here because this seems like a natural ending point where you see that everything we zoomed out from is actually its own painting. And to see this kind of zooming in effect, you can literally just zoom into the image, and you can see it maintains a high resolution, and we can zoom in quite far. So in theory, what we should be able to do here is now make a camera that literally zooms in. Make sure the camera is pointing downwards, so kind of zero out the rotation, and also make sure that orthographic is enabled. That's gonna make sure we don't have any kind of weird perspective shifting. And we are literally gonna take our orthographic scale and start it at the value 1. So that each time we zoom out by 2, it's kind of like matching with the images. At least that is how it should work in theory. I'm going to make this a 120 frame composition, hover over it and hit I, and then I'm going to increase our orthographic scale. Now, if I can remember the number, I think it was 256, since that's a power of 2. This is where we are going to end our zoom out, so I'm going to click I for keyframe. But when we play the animation, you can see there's this kind of weird motion where it starts off like super fast, and then the zoom out kind of slows down. I want a constant zooming out. And this is the thing I was talking about, where the zooming, or really zooming out, is an exponential process. We keep zooming out by a factor of 2, which is a power exponential curve. To make this work, in other words, all we need to do is select our keyframes, hit T, which stands for interpolation somehow, and instead of linear or any of these, make sure to click exponential. And you can see now when we play this, we're getting a constant speed zoom out. Which is pretty cool. But to blend the transition just a bit more, a great trick we can use is just adding motion blur so that the edges are very kind of blurred out. So I'm just gonna enable motion blur, and this is an Eevee motion blur. So all we can really do is increase the step count. You can see when we render, we have a bit of motion blur on the edges. Actually, it doesn't line up at all, but that's an artifact of Midjourney, not of this process. If you wanted to make it a bit better, you're gonna have to literally draw masks that isolate certain sections. Add a bit of lens distortion. I'm gonna add some dispersion, which you can see kind of adds chromatic aberration. But the key is to add some distortion, and I'm not really sure in which direction. Definitely not that. But you can see that this kind of gives the room some like dynamicness. I do think that it's kind of hidden the effect a lot more. Although I could have probably gone softer on the dispersion is what I'm seeing. You can literally keyframe stuff in the compositor. So I'm gonna have a keyframe on the distortion on frame 1, and then at the end, or maybe frame 120 really, I'm gonna keyframe the distortion to be 0. So there is our final result. Is it the prettiest thing I've seen? Yes, it's the prettiest thing I've ever seen. And if you want access to this and actually download the blend file and the images and all this, I'm gonna make it available on Patreon. So there's a link in the description for Patreon. Really, it's about getting blend files and supporting what I do here, because making tutorials for free is not a viable business model, as you would have guessed. It's only because of crowdfunding that I can make it work. So check out Patreon. I hope you learned something from this tutorial. AI for the win. See ya.